Alistair Finch lived in a big, quiet house. It was the kind of house people would see in magazines, with white walls, huge windows, and so much space that every sound seemed to get lost in it. He had built this life from nothing. He came from a simple family and, through hard work and a sharp mind for business, had become a very wealthy man. For him, success was a simple idea. It was about what you could own, what you could build, and what you could control. His house was not just a home. It was a symbol of his victory in life. But inside, the house felt more like a beautiful museum than a warm home. The rooms were perfectly decorated, but they lacked the messy, happy feeling of a family living in them. His wife was a kind and graceful woman, but over the years a quiet distance had grown between them. They spoke in polite sentences like two diplomats from different countries, careful not to disturb the peace. Their love had not disappeared, but it had grown quiet, buried under years of long work hours and busy schedules. Their biggest worry, and also their biggest mystery, was their son. The boy was 12 years old with thoughtful eyes that seemed to see everything. He was a quiet child who preferred to spend his time in his room, drawing pictures or reading books about animals in faraway places. His name was Leo, but to Alistair, his son often felt like a stranger. Alistair did not understand the boy's quiet nature. He saw it as a weakness. In the world of business that Alistair knew, you had to be loud, you had to be strong, and you had to want to win. His son did not seem to want any of that. This misunderstanding created a wall between father and son. Alistair would try to connect by buying Leo expensive gifts, the latest video game console, a new high-tech bicycle, a limited edition designer shirt. He believed these things were proof of his love, but the boy would just smile a small, polite smile and say, "Thank you, Father." The excitement Alistair hoped to see was never there. This frustrated Alistair deeply. He felt his son was ungrateful, that he did not understand the value of anything. One evening, this frustration boiled over. Alistair had come home from a long day to find Leo sitting in the garden, not playing but just watching a line of ants carry crumbs. To Alistair, this was a waste of time. "Leo, what are you doing?" Alistair asked, his voice tight with irritation. "Just watching, Father," the boy replied softly. "This is what you do all day? You don't play sports, you don't compete. How will you ever learn to be strong in this world?" Alistair said. The boy looked down, not knowing what to say. He didn't know how to explain that he found the world of ants more interesting and more honest than the world of business deals. The next day, Alistair decided it was time for a tough lesson. He called his son into his large wood-paneled home office. He sat behind his big desk and Leo stood in front of it, looking small. "Leo," Alistair began, his voice firm, "I have decided to stop your allowance. You will get no more pocket money for the next month." The boy's eyes widened in surprise. "A man needs to understand the value of money," Alistair continued. "He needs to know what it means to have none, to feel the hunger for it. That hunger is what pushes you to work, to earn, to succeed. You need to learn this lesson. You need to struggle a little to build character." He looked at his son, expecting an argument, maybe even some tears, but Leo just stood there, his shoulders slumping slightly. He simply nodded and whispered, "Okay, Father." That okay felt like a defeat to Alistair. He had wanted a reaction, any reaction, but this quiet acceptance felt worse than anger. He watched his son leave the room, the door clicking shut with a soft final sound. Alistair turned back to his computer screen, telling himself he was doing the right thing. This was how you made a boy into a man. What Alistair did not see was what happened after Leo left the room. The boy walked slowly up the grand staircase to his bedroom. His room was filled with every toy and gadget a child could want, but it felt empty. He wasn't sad about the money. He was sad because he felt more alone than ever. His father saw his quietness as a problem to be fixed. He didn't see it as just who he was. Leo looked out his window at the large, perfectly manicured lawn. He thought about his father's words. You need to know what it means to have none. He had friends at school who didn't have big houses or new clothes, but they had something he didn't, a loud, messy, joyful family life. They had parents who laughed with them, who had time for them. In his beautiful silent house, Leo felt he had nothing that truly mattered. His father's lesson was about financial struggle, but Leo was already struggling with something else entirely, a deep feeling of loneliness. And he was about to find his own way to solve it. The morning after his talk with Leo, Alistair woke up feeling sure of himself. He had given his son an important lesson, And even if the boy didn't understand it now, he would one day. He was sure of it. Life, in Alistair's opinion, was the best teacher, and he was just giving Leo a small, safe taste of its harder lessons. A week passed. The big house felt even quieter. Leo was home, but he was like a ghost moving through the rooms. He would come home from school, go straight to his room, and only come down for dinner. During their meals, the silence was so heavy you could almost feel its weight. The only sounds were the soft clinking of expensive cutlery on fine china. Alistair would try to start a conversation. "How was school today, son?" "It was fine, Father," Leo would reply, his eyes on his plate. "Did you learn anything interesting?" "Not really," and that would be the end of it. Alistair felt a strange tightness in his chest during these silences. This wasn't the reaction he had expected. He had thought Leo might complain, or maybe even try to negotiate to get his allowance back. That would have shown a fighting spirit. This quiet surrender felt all wrong. Meanwhile, Leo was living a secret life. After school, instead of taking the family car straight home, he had started asking the driver to drop him off at a small community center a few blocks from his school. It was a place he had passed many times, always seeing children running around, laughing and shouting. It was the complete opposite of his own quiet world. The first day he went there, he just stood outside the fence watching. A group of boys were kicking an old half-flat soccer ball in a dusty field. They were shouting, arguing over a goal, then bursting into laughter. They played with a raw, joyful energy that was completely new to him. One of the boys, noticing Leo standing alone, had waved him over. "Hey, you want to play?" "We need one more." Leo, his heart beating fast, had shaken his head and walked away quickly. But the next day he came back. And the day after that, he started bringing things from his room. A new soccer ball still in its box, a few video games he never played, some shiny notebooks. He would just leave them on a bench near the field and walk away. After a few days, the same boy who had waved at him before approached him. "Are you the one leaving all that stuff?" he asked. He wasn't suspicious, just curious. Leo nodded, too nervous to speak. "Why?" the boy asked, his head tilted. Leo thought about his father's words. My father wants me to learn what it's like to have nothing," he said honestly. The boy laughed a warm, easy laugh. "Well, giving us your stuff is a funny way of having nothing." He stuck out his hand. "Come on. You can't just give us things. You have to play with us too. My name is... well, you can just call me my friend for now." That was the beginning. Leo started going to the community center every day. He was bad at soccer at first, but the other boys didn't make fun of him. They taught him. They showed him how to kick the ball, how to pass. In return, Leo would sit with them after they played and help them with their homework, especially with reading and math. He discovered he was a good teacher. He started to understand their lives. They talked about their parents working 2 jobs, about sharing a small bedroom with brothers and sisters, about saving up for months to buy a new pair of shoes. They had worries he had never even imagined, but they also had something he desperately wanted, a deep, unbreakable connection. They teased each other, they fought, and they made up instantly. They shared everything, from a bag of chips to their biggest secrets. Leo, for the first time in his life, felt like he belonged. He wasn't the rich kid here. He was just Leo, the boy who was bad at soccer but good at math. He started to see the things in his overflowing bedroom not as treasures but as a heavy weight. One afternoon, looking at his friends playing in their old simple clothes, he had an idea. A real idea, not born out of anger or sadness, but out of a new feeling. Friendship. The next day, he brought a bag with him. Inside was the expensive, limited edition designer polo shirt his father had given him. It was bright blue and felt soft and expensive. He had never worn it. It felt too much like a uniform for a life he didn't want. He walked up to his new friend, the one who had first welcomed him. "Here," Leo said, holding out the shirt. "This is for you." His friend looked at it, his eyes wide. "For me, but this is a really nice shirt. I can't take this, please," Leo said, his voice earnest. "My father is teaching me a lesson about having nothing, so I want to show you what it's like to have something, a real something between friends." The boy looked at Leo and a slow, understanding smile spread across his face. He took the shirt. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft. This is the nicest thing anyone has ever given me." He immediately took off his own old faded t-shirt and put on the new blue polo. It fit him perfectly. He stood a little taller, a proud smile on his face as he ran back to the game. Watching him run across the field, laughing in that beautiful blue shirt, Leo felt a happiness so warm and real, it almost made him cry. He had never felt this good after getting any gift. Giving this one away felt like he had finally found the true value of the things he owned. It wasn't in keeping them, but in sharing them. Saturday morning arrived, and for Alistair Finch it was no different from a Tuesday. His mind was a whirlwind of numbers and strategies. A big merger was on the table, a complex deal that could add millions to his wealth. He sat in the back of his quiet, smooth-riding car, a silver symbol of his success as his driver took him through the city towards his office. He stared at the papers on his lap, but the words were starting to blur together. He needed a break, just a moment to clear his head. "Take the long way through the park, please," he instructed the driver. The car turned away from the tall glass buildings and entered the green open space of the city park. The change was immediate. The harsh lines of the city softened into gentle slopes of grass and the shady outlines of old trees. Alistair rolled down his window, letting in the warm air and the distant, happy sounds of people enjoying their weekend. For a moment, the tight knot of stress in his shoulders began to loosen. And then he saw them. A group of boys, maybe 10 or 12 of them, were playing soccer on a dusty, worn-out field. They were using a ball that had seen better days, and 2 piles of jackets served as goalposts. They were shouting, laughing, and running with a kind of pure, untamed energy that was completely absent from his own son's life. His eyes were drawn to one boy in particular. This boy was a whirlwind of motion, darting between other players with incredible speed. He had a bright, confident smile on his face as he stole the ball and kicked it towards the makeshift goal, scoring with a triumphant shout. A strange, sharp feeling pierced Alistair's heart. It wasn't just about the game. It was about the joy. This boy, playing in a public park with a ragged ball, possessed a spark that Alistair desperately wished he could see in his own son. Leo was always so calm, so contained. This boy was alive with passion. And then his businessman's eye noticed something else. Something that did not belong on that dusty field. The boy was wearing a shirt that was unmistakable. It was a limited edition designer polo shirt, a particular shade of brilliant blue. Alistair remembered buying it for Leo very clearly. He remembered the high price tag, the exclusive brand, the way the salesperson had assured him it was one of only a few in the entire city. He had given it to Leo, hoping it would finally be a gift that impressed him. Leo had just said thank you in his quiet way and put it in his closet. A cold, hard anger started to burn in Alistair's stomach. That shirt was here, on this boy. There was only one explanation. Leo must have sold it. He had cut off his allowance, and the boy's first reaction was to sell the expensive gifts his own father had given him. To him, it felt like a personal insult, a rejection of everything he had worked for. All his frustration with his son, the quietness, the lack of ambition, the ingratitude, boiled over into this single moment. "Stop the car," he said, his voice low and tight. The car pulled over. Alistair stepped out, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel path. He walked towards the field, his posture stiff, his face like a thundercloud. The game slowly came to a halt as the boys noticed the well-dressed stranger approaching them. They fell silent, looking at him with a mix of curiosity and caution. Alistair ignored the others. His eyes were locked on the boy in the blue shirt. He pointed a finger, his hand trembling slightly with anger. "You, young man, come here." The boy looked surprised, but he wasn't scared. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with his arm and walked over, his friends watching closely. "Where did you get that shirt?" Alistair demanded, his voice sharp and loud in the quiet park. The boy looked down at the shirt, then back at Alistair. He seemed to be thinking, trying to understand why this man was so angry about his clothes. "Sir," the boy said, his voice clear and steady, "your child gave me this shirt yesterday." The words were simple, but they hit Alistair like a physical shock. He had been ready for a lie. He had been ready to hear that Leo had sold it for cash. But this? Gave? The word made no sense to him. It didn't fit into his understanding of the world. Why would anyone just give away something so valuable? He stared at the boy, his mind racing. The anger was still there, but now it was mixed with a deep, swirling confusion. This was not the lesson he was trying to teach. This was not the reaction he had expected. His plan was for Leo to feel the sting of having nothing, to crave the things money could buy. Instead, his son was giving his things away. The simple honesty in the boy's face told him it was the truth. There was no guilt, no fear, just a straightforward statement. Alistair's confident, well-ordered world, where every action had a predictable and logical reaction, suddenly felt very shaky. He had come to the park to accuse a boy of theft, and instead he was the one who felt accused, standing there in his expensive suit, being schooled by a child in a dusty field. The lesson was turning out very different from what he had planned, and he was no longer the teacher. The boy's simple sentence seemed to hang in the air between them. "Your child gave me this shirt yesterday." For a long moment, Alistair couldn't speak. The angry words he had prepared were stuck in his throat. The wind rustled the leaves on the trees, and from a distance, he could still hear the happy shouts of the other children, but to him it all sounded muffled, as if he were underwater. His mind was a storm of confusion. Gave it why? What was the logic? What was the profit? In Alistair's world, you did not give away valuable assets for nothing. Every action was a transaction, a step towards gaining something else. But this simple act of giving, made no sense to him. It felt like a door had been opened to a room he never knew existed, and the light from inside was blinding him. He finally found his voice, but it came out quiet, less sure than before. "He gave it to you?" he repeated, as if hearing the words a second time would make them easier to understand. The boy nodded, his eyes still clear and honest. He could see the man's confusion, and it seemed to make him feel bolder. He wasn't talking to a scary, angry man anymore. He was talking to someone who just didn't get it. "Yes, sir," the boy said. "He gave it to me at the community center." He gestured with his head in the direction of a simple brick building down the road. "He gave my friend his almost new shoes, too. And another boy got a really warm, nice jacket. He's been bringing us lots of things." Each new sentence was another small shock. Shoes, a jacket? Alistair's mind flashed to Leo's walk-in closet, stuffed with clothes, many with the tags still on. He had always seen it as a collection of offerings, gifts to win his son's affection that had seemingly failed. Now he was seeing it as a treasure chest that Leo was emptying for strangers. But why? Alistair asked, the question escaping his lips as a genuine, helpless whisper. He was the millionaire, the deal-maker, and he was asking a young boy for an explanation. The boy shifted his weight, his dirty soccer shoes scraping in the dust. He looked at Alistair with a gaze that was wise beyond his years. "He told us about the lesson," he explained. "He said his dad, you, sir, were teaching him what it was like to have nothing." The boy paused, letting the words sink in. "So Leo decided he wanted to show us what it was like to have something." Alistair felt his breath catch in his chest. "So Leo decided." The words echoed in his head. His son wasn't just passively accepting the punishment, he was actively responding to it. But not in the way Alistair had imagined, with hunger, with a drive to earn. Instead, he was responding with generosity. The boy wasn't finished. The story was bursting to come out. "But it's not just the stuff, sir," he continued, his voice gaining warmth and energy. "He didn't just drop off a bag and leave. He started coming every day after school. He's our friend." He pointed to the group of boys who were still watching from a distance. "He helps us with our homework. He's really smart with numbers and reading. And we teach him how to play soccer. He wasn't very good at first," the boy added with a small, friendly laugh. "But he's getting better. He tries really hard." Alistair stood perfectly still, listening. He was seeing a picture of his son being painted right in front of him, and it was a picture he had never seen before. It wasn't the quiet, sad boy at the dinner table. This was a boy who helped with homework, a boy who tried hard at soccer, a boy who had friends. Then the boy said the final words, the ones that changed everything. He looked directly at Alistair, his expression completely sincere. "He told us, sir. He told us that before he started coming here, he felt really alone in that big house. But now with us, he said he finally feels like he belongs somewhere. He finally feels like he belongs somewhere." The sentence landed on Alistair's heart with the weight of 1,000 bricks. The noise of the park completely disappeared. All he could see was the face of his son, the quiet nods, the downcast eyes at the dinner table. He thought he was building his son's character by taking things away. He thought he was teaching him about the real world. But all this time, his son was living in a real world of his own, a world of loneliness that Alistair had been too busy to notice. The expensive shirt, the merger deal, the value of money, It all suddenly seemed so small, so meaningless. He had been trying to teach his son a lesson about poverty, and his son had instead taught him a lesson about wealth. The real wealth wasn't in the bank. It was in the dusty field, in the laughter of friends, in the feeling of belonging. The anger was gone. The confusion was slowly clearing, replaced by a deep, aching shame and a dawning, staggering understanding. He looked at the boy in the blue shirt no longer as a thief but as a messenger. A messenger who had just delivered the most important news of his life. Without another word, Alistair Finch, the self-made millionaire, turned his back on the field and slowly walked to his car. He wasn't going to the office anymore. The most important deal of his life was waiting for him at home. The drive home was unlike any other Alistair had ever taken. The usual thoughts about business and money were completely gone. His mind was filled with a single powerful image, his son's face. But it wasn't the quiet, sad face from the dinner table. It was a new face, one he had never actually seen but could now perfectly imagine. It was the face of a boy laughing, running, trying hard to kick a soccer ball, helping a friend with a math problem. It was the face of a boy who felt he belonged. The big, beautiful house looked different when he pulled into the driveway. Before, it had been a symbol of his success. Now it just looked like a very large, very quiet building. He walked inside and the silence felt heavy and sad, not peaceful. He could almost feel the loneliness his son had been talking about. He found his wife in the living room arranging flowers. She looked up, surprised to see him home so early. "Alistair, is everything all right? You look pale." He just shook his head, unable to find the words to explain. "Where's Leo?" he asked, his voice soft. "He's in his room," she said, her eyes full of concern. "He's been up there all afternoon drawing." Alistair nodded and walked up the grand staircase. Each step felt heavy. He stopped outside his son's door, his heart pounding. For a moment he felt nervous, like he was about to go into the most important meeting of his life. He took a deep breath and knocked gently. "Come in," a small voice said from the other side. Alistair opened the door. Leo was sitting on the floor by his bed, a sketchbook open in front of him. He looked up, and for a split second Alistair saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. It was the look of a boy expecting to be scolded. That look broke Alistair's heart. He realized that was the look he was used to seeing from his son. He didn't say anything at first. He just walked in and sat down on the floor next to Leo, leaning his back against the bed. It was something he hadn't done in years. Leo watched him, completely confused. His father never sat on the floor. "Leo," Alistair began, his voice gentle. He looked around the room at all the toys and games, and finally his eyes landed on his son. "I was in the park today." Leo's face immediately went still. He looked down at his drawing, his shoulders tensing up. He was waiting for the storm to come. He was sure his father had found out about the community center and the gifts and was very, very angry. "I met a boy there," Alistair continued. "A boy who was playing soccer. He was a very good player. Full of energy." Leo didn't look up. He just nodded slowly, bracing himself. "And he was wearing a shirt," Alistair said. "A blue shirt. It looked very familiar." This was it. Leo closed his eyes for a second, waiting for the shouting to start. But it didn't. Instead, his father's voice remained soft, curious even. "He told me something," Alistair said. "He told me that you gave him that shirt." Leo finally looked up, his eyes wide with surprise and confusion. This was not going the way he had expected at all. Alistair looked at his son, and his eyes were not angry. They were filled with a deep, genuine emotion. He told me that you gave your shoes to another boy, and a jacket to someone else." Leo just nodded again, still unable to speak, not understanding what was happening. "Then he told me something else," Alistair said, and his voice became even softer, filled with a new feeling. "He told me that you've been going to the community center every day after school, that you help your friends with their homework, and that they teach you how to play soccer." A single tear escaped from Leo's eye and rolled down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away, afraid that showing emotion would make things worse. But Alistair's own eyes were getting wet. He looked at his son, really looked at him, and for the first time he didn't see a problem to be fixed. He saw a young man with a kind and generous heart. "Leo," Alistair whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "The boy said that you told him you finally feel like you belong somewhere." Hearing his own words repeated back to him was too much for Leo. He started to cry quietly, all the loneliness of the past few years pouring out of him. Seeing his son cry, Alistair could no longer hold back his own tears. He reached out and put a hand on Leo's shoulder. "I am so sorry, son," he said, the words feeling both heavy and freeing. "I am so sorry that you felt so alone in your own home. I was so busy trying to give you everything I thought you needed, that I forgot to give you the one thing you actually needed. Me." Leo looked up at his father, his face wet with tears, but his eyes were now filled with a new hope. Alistair moved closer and wrapped his arms around his son, pulling him into a tight hug. It was a real strong hug, the kind they hadn't shared since Leo was a very small boy. Leo hugged him back, holding on tightly, as if he never wanted to let go. When they finally pulled apart, Alistair looked at his son and asked the most important question of his life. It wasn't about school or grades or his future. It was simple, and it came straight from his heart. "Tell me," he said, a small, warm smile finally appearing on his face. "Tell me about your friends." Leo's face lit up like the sun. The sadness was gone, replaced by a bright, happy energy. He started talking, his words tumbling out quickly. He talked about his friend who was the best at soccer, and the other who wanted to be a doctor, and the one who told the funniest jokes. He talked about their games, their homework sessions, their dreams. Alistair listened. He didn't interrupt. He just listened and watched his son's face, which was now full of life and joy. He realized that the most valuable thing he had ever acquired wasn't in a bank vault. It wasn't a company or a house. It was this moment, right here on the floor of his son's room, finally understanding the wonderful person his son had become. The lesson was over, and he was the one who had learned everything.